You are standing in a salt mine in central Germany. It is April 1945. The war in Europe is almost over. You are an American soldier, part of the Third Army, advancing through what remains of the Third Reich. The mine is cold, damp, and dark. Your footsteps echo off stone walls carved centuries ago. Dim lights flicker as you descend deeper underground, following reports from local civilians about something hidden in the tunnels. And then you see it. Stacks of wooden crates piled floor to ceiling, bags marked with foreign bank seals. And then, as you open one crate after another, you see what is inside. Gold bars. Thousands of them, stamped with the names of central banks from across Europe, Belgium, the Netherlands, Austria, Czechoslovakia. You move deeper into the vault, more crates, more bags, and then you find something else. Suitcases, trunks, boxes filled with jewelry, watches, eyeglasses, and bags. 207 bags, filled with wedding rings, dental fillings, cigarette cases, all mixed together like scrap metal. One officer picks up a handful of gold rings and realizes what he is holding. These are not state reserves. These are not central bank assets. These are the melted remains of people's lives, rings pulled from fingers, gold pulled from teeth, the last possessions of people who were murdered. And in that moment, standing in a salt mine 2,000 feet underground, you realize this is not just Germany's gold. This is everyone's, and it is covered in blood. This is where the story ends. To understand how it began, you have to go back to a country that had money so worthless, people burned it for heat. How do you fund a world war when your own money is trash? Who decided that other nations' vaults and other people's bodies would solve that problem? And how much of that blood money ever truly found its way home? To understand why gold mattered so much to Nazi Germany, you need to understand how broken the German economy was after World War I. In the early 1920s, the Weimar Republic suffered one of the worst cases of hyperinflation in history. The Reichsmark, Germany's currency, became worthless almost overnight. People carried money in wheelbarrows to buy bread. Salaries were paid twice a day because prices doubled between morning and afternoon. Children played with stacks of banknotes like building blocks because they were worth less than the paper they were printed on. By 1923, it took 4.2 trillion marks to equal $1. Germany eventually stabilized the currency, but the damage was done. No one trusted German money anymore. Foreign suppliers refused Reichsmarks. If you wanted to buy oil, steel, or rubber from abroad, you needed something real, something trusted. You needed gold. And by the mid-1930s, as Hitler rearmed Germany in secret and prepared for war, the problem became acute. Germany was running out of foreign exchange. The Reichsbank, Germany's central bank, had limited gold reserves, and without gold, Germany could not buy the raw materials it needed to build tanks, planes, and bombs. So the Nazi government, led by economic technocrats like Hjalmar Schacht and later Walter Funk, made a decision. If we do not have enough gold, we will take it from someone else. In international trade, no one trusted German promises. They trusted only German gold, and the fastest way to get gold was simply to steal it. March 1938. German troops march into Austria in what the Nazis called the Anschluss, the union of Austria with Germany. It was presented as a peaceful voluntary merger. In reality, it was conquest. Within days, Nazi officials seized the Austrian National Bank and emptied its vaults. Approximately 90 tons of gold, worth about $100 million at the time, was transferred to the Reichsbank in Berlin. That gold became the foundation for Hitler's rearmament program. Without it, Germany might have been forced to slow or even stop military preparations. But with it, the Nazis could buy oil from Romania, tungsten from Portugal, ball bearings from Sweden. The Austrian gold was just the beginning. In March 1939, Germany occupied Czechoslovakia. More gold seized, this time from the Czechoslovak National Bank. Then, in 1940, the invasions began in earnest. Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France. Each time, the same pattern. German forces would secure the central bank. Officials would inventory the gold reserves, and then, through legal fictions, forced currency unions, or outright theft, the gold would be transferred to German control. Belgium lost $223 million in gold. The Netherlands lost $193 million. France lost hundreds of millions more. By 1942, Germany had looted over 600 tons of gold from occupied Europe, worth about $600 million at the time, which today would be worth over $20 billion. This was not random plunder. This was systematic, bureaucratic robbery. Lawyers drafted the paperwork. Bank clerks processed the transfers. Accountants balanced the ledgers. Everything was done properly, with forms and stamps and official seals. And before a single victim's ring was pulled, before a single filling was melted, the Nazi state had already built a machine for turning conquered nations' reserves into Hitler's private war chest. But state gold was not enough. As the war dragged on and the costs mounted, the Nazis needed more. And they found another source, the people they were murdering. From August 1942 until January 1945, the SS, the Schutzstaffel, Hitler's elite paramilitary organization, made 76 deliveries to the Reichsbank in Berlin. These deliveries contained property seized from concentration camp victims, jewelry, watches, coins, currency, and gold, including dental fillings pulled from the mouths of the dead. The deliveries were logged under coded accounts. The most notorious was labeled Max Heiliger, a fake name that served as a front for Heinrich Himmler and the SS. Once the loot arrived at the Reichsbank, it was processed with the same cold efficiency as any other transaction. Workers sorted through the items. Jewelry was separated from coins. Gold dental work was separated from gold rings. Foreign currency was counted and exchanged. Everything was weighed, catalogued, and entered into ledgers. Much of the gold was melted down into bars, erasing any trace of where it came from. The bars were then mixed with other gold reserves, making it nearly impossible to distinguish state gold looted from central banks from victim gold stolen from murdered individuals. The Reichsbank sold the gold, both kinds, to banks in neutral countries like Switzerland. Those banks paid in Swiss francs or other hard currencies, and Germany used those currencies to buy the oil, steel, tungsten, and other materials it needed to keep the war going. One historian described it this way: the Nazis turned people into gold bars and then turned gold bars into gasoline and bullets. Think about that for a moment. A wedding ring taken from a Jewish woman at Auschwitz, melted down in Berlin, sold to a Swiss bank, and the proceeds used to buy oil from Romania. Oil that fueled a German tank that killed Allied soldiers on the Eastern Front. That is the path. That is how the system worked. And at every step along the way, ordinary people, bank clerks, accountants, train operators, metal workers, made it possible. They processed the forms, they kept the books, they loaded the crates, they melted the gold. They were just doing their jobs. Switzerland was not the only neutral country that accepted Nazi gold, but it was the most important. Between 1939 and 1945, the Swiss National Bank purchased an estimated 440 million in gold from Nazi Germany, over half of which was looted from occupied countries or stolen from victims. The Swiss claimed they did not know the gold was stolen, but evidence suggests otherwise. A post-war investigation led by Swiss historian Jean-François Berdier found that the Swiss National Bank's governing board knew at an early point that the gold was being looted. But they bought it anyway, because gold is gold, and business is business. Germany paid Switzerland in gold. Switzerland paid Germany in Swiss francs. And Germany used those francs to buy war materials from other neutral countries: tungsten from Portugal, ball bearings from Sweden, chromium from Turkey, oil from Spain and Romania. Without this system, Germany would have run out of foreign currency by 1940. The war machine would have stalled, rearmament would have slowed. Hitler might have been forced to negotiate or delay his invasions. But with stolen gold flowing through neutral banks, the war continued for 5 more years. Let me give you a concrete example of how this worked. Gold is looted from the Belgian National Bank, $193 million worth. It is shipped to Berlin and deposited in the Reichsbank. The Reichsbank sells a portion of that gold to the Swiss National Bank. Switzerland pays in Swiss francs. Germany uses those francs to buy tungsten from Portugal. Tungsten used to harden steel for tank armor and artillery shells. Those tanks and shells are then used to kill British, American, and Soviet soldiers. At every step, there were people who made decisions, bank executives who approved the purchases, government officials who signed the contracts, accountants who balanced the books. And at every step, they could have said no. They could have asked questions. They could have refused to participate. But they did not. So here is the question I want you to think about. When a neutral bank takes gold from a regime that openly robs and murders and sends back fuel and steel in return, how neutral is it really? By early 1945, the Reich was collapsing. The Soviets were closing in from the east. The Americans and British from the west. Berlin was being bombed around the clock. Walter Funk, president of the Reichsbank and Reich Minister of Economics, made a decision. Move the gold reserves out of Berlin before they are captured or destroyed. In February 1945, most of Germany's remaining gold reserves, worth approximately $238 million, along with billions of Reichsmarks and large quantities of foreign currency, were loaded onto trains and transported to a salt mine in Merkers, a small village in central Germany, about 200 miles southwest of Berlin. The Merkers mine had been used for salt and potassium extraction for centuries, but during the war, the German government requisitioned space underground to store materials and continue armament production away from Allied bombers. The gold was placed in a special vault area deep inside the mine, designated Room Number 8. And then, in March 1945, the SS sent one final shipment, 18 bags of gold and silver bars, and 189 suitcases, trunks, and boxes filled with jewelry, coins, dental gold, watches, and other items looted from concentration camp victims. All of it was unloaded into the mine and stored alongside the official state reserves. By the time the Americans arrived in April, over 8,000 gold bars, 55 boxes of gold bullion, 3,226 bags of gold coins, 8 bags of gold rings, and 207 bags of SS loot were sitting in the darkness, 2,000 feet underground. On April 4, 1945, soldiers from the U.S. Third Army were moving through central Germany when they captured 2 French women who had been forced to work in the area. The women told American officers about a mine near Merkers where they said the Germans had hidden gold and art. The Americans investigated. On April 6th, a small unit descended into the mine. What they found shocked them. Room after room filled with crates, bags, and containers. As they opened them, they realized the scale of what they were looking at. This was not just a storage facility. This was the financial skeleton of the Third Reich. There were gold bars stamped with the seals of central banks from across Europe: Belgium, the Netherlands, Austria, France, Czechoslovakia. There were bags of gold coins from a dozen different countries. There were crates of foreign currency, dollars, pounds, francs, and then there were the suitcases. Inside, wedding rings by the thousands, dental gold, still shaped like fillings and crowns, watches, glasses, cigarette cases, jewelry, all jumbled together, sorted only by weight and metal content. One officer later wrote, "It was like standing in the wreckage of people's lives. You could see where these things came from, someone's wedding, someone's graduation, someone's last day alive. And it had all been melted down and mixed with state reserves, as if lives and nations were the same thing." General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself visited the mine on April 12th, just days after the discovery. He walked through the vaults, looked at the gold, at the bags of rings, and reportedly said very little. But photographs were taken, evidence was catalogued, and slowly investigators began to piece together the full horror of what had happened. This was not just spoils of war. This was the financial record of genocide and conquest, stored in a hole in the ground, waiting to be divided up or destroyed. After the war, the Allies faced an enormous task: identify the looted gold, determine where it came from, and return it to the rightful owners. In 1946, the United States, Britain, and France established the Tripartite Gold Commission to handle the process. The commission's job was to identify gold looted from central banks and return it to the governments that had been robbed. Some gold was returned. Belgium, the Netherlands, France, and other countries received portions of their stolen reserves back. But the process was slow, incomplete, and deeply flawed. First, not all the gold was recovered. Germany had sold or hidden large quantities before the Allies arrived. Some of it ended up in neutral countries and was never fully accounted for. Switzerland returned only a fraction of what it had received, about $58 million out of an estimated $440 million. Second, it was often impossible to distinguish state gold from victim gold. Once the bars were melted and mixed, the origins were erased. So even when gold was returned to governments, it was unclear how much of it had originally come from private citizens who were murdered. Third, much of the victim gold was never claimed. Entire families had been wiped out. There were no heirs, no one to file a claim. So the gold sat in vaults, unclaimed and unresolved. In 1997, over 50 years after the war ended, the US government released a report detailing how much victim gold had been processed by the Reichsbank and where it had gone. The report confirmed what many had suspected. The Nazis had systematically looted both nations and individuals, and much of that wealth had never truly been returned. Some restitution funds were created, some compensation was paid, but for many families it was too late. The people who had owned those rings, those watches, those coins, they were long dead, and the gold had been traded, sold, and laundered so many times that tracing it back was nearly impossible. Now I want to ask you some hard questions, and I want you to think about them honestly. If a company or bank got rich by handling stolen assets in the 1940s and is still successful today, what does it owe to history and to the descendants of its victims? Is it enough to pay money into a fund 50 years later, or is there a deeper kind of justice that never happened? Do you think the clerks and executives who turned rings into bars, who processed the transfers, who balanced the books, were they as guilty as the men with guns? Or were they just cogs in a machine, doing what they were told? And here is the hardest question. If your country's prosperity rested partly on someone else's stolen gold, gold that was laundered through banks, sold to neutral countries, and used to fund the war that killed millions, would you want to know? Or would you rather not ask? Because this is not ancient history. Some of the banks that handled Nazi gold are still in business today. Some of the gold that was never returned is still sitting in vaults, part of national reserves, part of the financial system we all use. And the people who died, the ones whose rings were melted, whose teeth were pulled, whose savings were stolen, they have no voice. They cannot ask for justice. They cannot demand accountability. So I am asking you, do you think money can ever be washed clean of a past like this? Tell us in the comments. Would you bank with an institution if you knew its vaults were once filled with stolen lives? If this story moved you, if it made you angry, sad, or uncomfortable, please hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that these stories are worth remembering, even when they make us uneasy. We are dedicated to rescuing the money trails of history, the financial skeletons that most people would rather forget. If you want to join us on this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments and tell us, were the bankers and technocrats who made this system work as guilty as the soldiers who pulled the triggers? Or were they just doing their jobs? Because this is not just about the past. It is about the question of complicity, of responsibility, of whether we can ever truly separate the crime from the profit. Thank you for making sure the people who died for that gold and the nations that were robbed to fund a war are not forgotten. Some wars are fought with guns. This one was also fought with ledgers, scales, and bank transfers. And the scars are still there, if you know where to look.